Thanks everyone for coming. And thank you, Erin, again for being here to translate for us. And lots of hellos and good afternoons in the chat. So hello to all of you. But I'm happy to, I'm Maddie, by the way, if this is your first live stream. I'm Maddie, I'm the Skype Scientist intern, and I'm really excited to introduce Tykee, correct?
Yeah, that's me.
And yeah, he's going to be talking to us about fall bird migration and preparing for that, as well as it seems like a lot of really cool stuff with science communication and government work and environmental policy and birds in general, perhaps. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, I'm really happy that I could do this. This is something that I've been seeing on social media a lot. And, before we got on, we were talking about how Skype, a scientist, isn't on Skype, but Zoom, and it has almost exclusively been on Zoom. And how Zoom, there's a Zoom generation and now a Skype generation where I definitely feel no regrets to leaving Skype in the dust.
Yeah, Zoom is really awesome for just the fact that I'm getting hellos from New Jersey and Texas, and I think potentially Brazil. Like we're getting highs from everywhere, and it seems like we're reaching a wide audience today with Zoom, which is great.
Oh, this is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, tell us, I'm getting some questions about if you would consider yourself an ornithologist, and maybe tell us about what you do and kind of how you got to where you are.
That's really great. So the easy question to start, no, I do not consider myself an ornithologist. I consider myself a birder, a significant distinguishing or a definition worth going into. So I started as an environmental educator in Philadelphia, where I'm from. And it was actually my first job out of high school, where I was conducting public education projects to connect the neighboring community to the park. And one of the ways that I would do that, one of the best vehicles I found, has been through bird watching, through birding. Generally, the experience taught me how to interpret ecology, and it was through a social justice lens, because the education manager, my boss at the time, and now my best friend Tony, is woke. And so he, explained and he connected the ecology of the park to also the neighborhood, or also to the history of the neighborhood. Cobbs Creek Environmental Center is only a few blocks away from where the move bombing happened 35 years ago now. And when we look at what the park, well, when I was there 5 years ago, when we looked at what the park is and the relationship that neighbors have to it, we know that it is in reflection to the neglect and history of police violence that a lot of those residents feel when they go to this park that has no street lights, no benches, no trash cans. Those are three very simple things that can welcome a community to their neighborhood park. And those things, among other things, were indicators of environmental blight. And I don't know anybody who wants to be proud of a park that's in blight. But when I started working there, the park was a lot more clean, and it was fostering environmental education in a way that can bring the community together. And that was my first, path, my first step on the path to conservation. My first assignment was a belted kingfisher, where you got to pick up the Sibley, you got to pick up the Peterson, and get on Audubon to look up everything you can about this bird, kind of like a book report. And you come into work the next day, and then you share what you know off the top of your head, just to show what you studied. And I coincidentally got to see the bird in person when I came into work the next week. It was perched atop a cattail, and it did its call as it crossed the creek. And that was a moment that I was so present for, that I didn't really know that it meant that much at the time. I was just like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. Like, if this is what I do for work, not bad. but I didn't realize how important that was to connecting me on this path of conservation, where now I work at the National Audubon Society as the government affairs coordinator. That basically means I'm a bird lobbyist. And I'm not the lobbyist in the sense of like, I bust into congressional offices and I'm like, make sure your boss votes for the birds or we won't vote for them. That's not at all what I would imagine doing. But instead, I take out members of Congress and congressional staff on bird walks to, um, I want to say in meetings, you can easily talk about numbers and projects on the table and things that you can put on paper and you can slide that back and forth on the table. But something special happens when you can really, go outside and connect to places that are important to them and important to birds. And, with congressional staff, which are the walks I've done more exclusively, or at least until I broke my ankle in January. Yeah, but even before coronavirus, it was something else. But um, I, got to lead walks with congressional staff, and every single staffer, whether it was their first time birding, and of course, if this was, a couple times in for them, they all had a story about a bird. Everybody had a story that they could connect with. And that's not something that we would share if we were in a meeting discussing numbers and projects and all these other things. So having that connection has been really important, not just to our organizational reputation on the Hill, but also to show that birders and, like the idea of being a birder isn't, the same qualifications of an ornithologist, but it is someone who just appreciates birds, or the places that they need. And as you see, I have plenty of birds in my view. I have birds on my shirt. I have the vermilion flycatcher over there. I have a sage grouse and, let's see, and a duck and a hawk or a golden eagle.
We did
So,
get some comments about the hawk migration. Someone mentioned that their teacher and they're like preparing and excited about the hawk migration. And someone asked, yeah, if you watch birds of prey, specifically the red-tailed hawk ever.
oh yeah, absolutely. That's a very common one. And in fact, I would say that that's a model hawk to observe and understand its behavior, understand its, the way it flies. And, if you're lucky, you can hear the call sometimes. And when you can observe this bird and interact and see how it interacts with the environment, one of the more interesting things I found has been, in my own neighborhood in DC, there was a hawk, just circling around the home in the neighborhood and, making its call. And, everyone's listening to that. But I was like, what you're not hearing is all the other little birds. All the other little birds stop chirping because there's this giant hawk asking for lunch and no one wants to volunteer. Understandable, very understandable.
Yeah.
But, that's something that, yeah, red-tailed hawks, I hope you see a lot of them, and I hope you can see them do, some of the really interesting and engaging things.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious with that since we seem to have someone just said they love red-tailed hawks a lot. What's like one of their cool behaviors? Because I've definitely seen them circle around, but
Hmm.
do they do other unique things that would help identify them?
Yeah, so I learned that a juvenile red-tailed hawk and I think it's a juvenile female red-tailed hawk looked exactly like a male Cooper's hawk, and it is I think it's like the accipiter complex of the most difficult birds to identify, because that red-tailed hawk, yeah, it does have that red tail, but you can't always rely on that to identify it. When you can see that same red-tailed hawk go through, different layers of plumage, or if you can see that same red-tailed hawk in a different region, it will look so completely different. Um, so I would say, again, it's up to, how you want to do it, but observing the red-tailed hawk in different locations, you can really see the variety and diversity of plumage that it actually has.
Yeah, that's really cool. Back to what you were talking about, taking political figures on walks to kind of get them in touch with nature and get them in touch with the birds that are important in the area. Someone asked, who is the most enjoyable bird walk with? Or maybe a couple if you can't decide on just one.
Hmm. Well, I like I said, I haven't taken a member out on a bird walk where it was just me and the member for two reasons. One reason is often these walks should be and are conducted by constituents, people who are from those areas, who know those birds, and who vote for that person. I mostly supply the talking points, schedule the things, make sure the logistics are all set up, and just do all the stuff behind the scenes. And if there is an opportunity, I do say I would love to volunteer. But my assistance hasn't been required for that one reason, that we want to prioritize constituent voices. But for the second reason, which is pretty important, the timing of me working at Audubon coincided with the blue wave, so there was just like a ton of people to say hi to, and new people to say hi to, and so doing bird walks necessarily wasn't in the high priority of the political calculus. But it is something that again develops that relationship with the office, develops the relationship with the member and birds. But I do have a funny story about a bird walk, not that I was on, but one that I tell in folklore. And I'm not going to say who the member is because at this point I actually don't remember, and it will be impossible to find out. But apparently, he was, coming along on this bird walk, and I don't know if he was, pressed on time or anything like that. But they would go up and teach him how to use the binoculars, and okay, there goes a bird, and he'd look and be like, oh wow, that's really cool, and okay, they're and then they do the talking and all that, and at the end of the walk, when they're looking at pictures of the event, his lens and his binoculars were closed the entire time. So he was just saying whatever. He was just saying, yeah, I see it, seeing nothing. And so in all the pictures, they had to go in and Photoshop the caps off. It
That's
was,
amazing.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's, and also, like, what do you say when you're on the walk? You're like, excuse me, you're not seeing, you're lying. Like, you're just lying.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm so I'm more of like a lab biologist, so I definitely have had that when you like look in a microscope and you can't see. They're like, look at this thing, and you're like, yeah, okay.
Oh, Lord.
So with like lens caps on, I'd hope someone would ask.
Yeah, just something to think about. We try to do the one-on-one binocular use, which is, it's whatever you put into it. That's birding. Birding, you're gonna get out of it what you put into it.
So a pro tip for any aspiring birders out there: always remember to take the lens cap off and make sure you don't lose
Always.
it. Right?
Oh yeah. Also, they are important, as they are, part of what keeps the lens clean and safe. So
Mhm.
whenever I'm not using mine, I put them on. But when you're birding and you keep these on, you won't be able to see
Yeah,
anything.
that's hilarious. I love that. I love that story. So we're getting some questions about what your favorite type of bird is, since we talked pretty fondly of red-tailed hawks. But
Hmm.
yeah, we have a lot of question on what's your favorite type of bird and why, and maybe like the kinds of specific birds that you study or that are in your area.
Hmm. So my top three birds: northern cardinal, belted kingfisher, and green jay. Northern cardinal, year round, no matter where it is, and it covers a lot of the continent. That it can just look brilliant, male or female, first year or juvenile, is just a really great looking bird. And I think it inspires art. It's one of those birds that I think looks great, in the dead of winter. There's snow on the ground, not a leaf, you can't see any leaves, get rid of the leaves, and all you see is just like the cardinal. Whether it's male or female, you see the bright, brilliant, of the male red, or you see the female a lot more subtle, less gaudy, but she still has that really bright red beak that really shoots out with like the black mask situation. um Belted kingfisher, well, that was just that's my spark bird, and that's the bird that really got me started in all this. And it's the female belted kingfisher too, so if I were to get a tattoo, the belted kingfisher female is on that list of birds. So that's why the belted kingfisher is there. It just shares two lists. You gotta And then the green jay. The green jay is because for me, that's like the most crazy bird that I've ever seen before. And it was a bird that I almost didn't see when I was in McAllen, Texas at the Focus on Diversity conference. We went on a little bird trip. I was actually with Dr. J. Drew Lenham, and we thought that, we saw a lot of great things, don't get me wrong. Actually, and I do need the eBird list for that. So I should probably hit those guys up because yeah, again, right when we thought the field trip was going to end, it just swoops down on this branch, probably 20 feet away, still and almost at eye level. And it was just an incredible sight. It's a little bit bigger than a blue jay. Obviously, it has green, but it has this gradient of like yellow to blue and black. Google it. It's a really fantastic looking bird. It almost looks painted, almost like the cedar waxwing, which the cedar waxwing is in my top 5, but I'm going to give you my top 3 to save on the politics. Um, and as far as like birds that I study, I think that I would say I focus a lot on migratory birds. So the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was one of the I guess spark birds for the National Audubon Society, if you can think of it that way, where that legislation, that treaty with the United States, Canada, Mexico, Russia, Japan, that treaty was the first advocacy action that these folks took who used Audubon's name to start this organization for bird conservation. And we understand that birds are a barometer for environmental conditions, and protecting the full life cycle of the bird, that leads us to a heavy focus on how they migrate. We have a lot of science that lets us know through bird banding, through just knowing where they nest, and breeding atlases. We know, we're learning a lot about migratory birds, and we're learning a lot about what their habitats needs are. And that's the kind of stuff that when I am in those meetings with congressional staff and members of Congress, those are the things that I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the life cycle of the bird is connected to seeing its value as a barometer for environmental conditions. I mean, I'm also a birder myself, but there are also indicator species that are very, very important, on the ecological chain. So birds are just one of those things, and I think I'm a little biased. Birds are really cool, because look, I have a bird shirt, I have a bird bag, I have, again, the wood duck and the golden eagle, sage grouse. Birds are cool. So I think it has those two effects. I mean, honestly, this too. Imagine, you're a member of Congress, you get all these emails from all these folks asking about all these things, very important things too. We just happen to have our thing wrapped in a bird package, so we know that we're a part of a bigger movement. And I think it's important to realize that what we can advance in environmental conservation is also what we're advancing for humanity. So it's just nice that in that bigger picture of things, we get to talk about birds.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And we're getting some questions about, so I'm actually unfamiliar with the green jay as well, but I quickly Googled it and I wanted to make sure I'm going to share the right photo before I share it. They kind of have a black throat and like a little bit of blue on the top of their head.
Sounds about right.
Okay, I will share this really quick so everyone can see what we're talking about. So this is the Audubon website that
Oh
Tykee was
yeah.
mentioning. And yeah, they're really pretty. I've never seen these before, but I just wanted to show everyone because we were getting a lot of questions about like what is a green jay? What is a green jay? So yeah, definitely check out this like audubon.org website, y'all. And
Yeah, and actually that lists the climate vulnerability on the birds. Actually, could you scroll down on that a little
yeah.
bit? So a lot of this is so McAllen, Texas is like the southeast corner of Texas, 5 miles from the Mexican border. So like, of course, that's why it was so surprising that I initially wasn't going to see it, because they're just so common in that area. But this actually has their conservation status, like
Oh,
what science tells us about how climate change is affecting their migratory path.
oh wow. Yeah, this is really cool, you guys. So definitely check out this website and you can see these like different, you can even see climate threats facing this specific bird. So you
Yeah.
can kind of look up, you can look up your favorite bird and
Yeah,
see.
really, any bird. Yep.
Wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. I've recently had some friends that are really into birding, and I'm very new to this whole game.
It
I'm
is a
more of
game.
a herper. I like reptiles a lot, and I work with
Oh.
marine invertebrates. Uh,
Oh.
but I mean, birds are dinosaur relatives, so they, of course, they.
Yeah, I guess we're related. I mean, I'll accept a herper before I accept a fish person. I don't understand the fish people. Like, fish? What?
For
They
everyone's
poop where they
context,
swim.
yeah. There's a big scientist Twitter debate over bird versus fish. So that's the context behind that. There's a lot of some scientists are very tied to their organism, and they've had this debate going on for a while.
Yeah,
So,
it's friendly, it's a friendly competitive thing
yeah.
because, it's kind of like sports teams where, you just grew up being an Eagles fan, and so you like birds versus growing up and being a Dolphins fan, so you like fish. Like yeah, or maybe mammals. The mammal people, that's a Twitter that I've been getting into lately. But you can get one of those mammalogists on here soon, and actually Black Mammalogist Week is coming up in September, so that's something to look forward to.
Awesome. Yeah, I do enjoy a good mammal too. I feel like
Yeah, good mammal.
mammals are a little bit simpler sometimes to ID. Birds are so unique. It's like,
Hmm.
and they're so fast. You gotta like quickly figure them out. I
Yeah,
feel like
yeah,
having a skilled birder with you always really helps. Or just talking right now to you, get some tips.
yeah, and that's what we're learning.
Um, and we did get a question talking about birding. What's your favorite app to ID birds?
My favorite app to ID birds is totally not sponsored, but it is the Audubon app. um, and that's because I have an Android phone. But if I had an iPhone, I would download the $25 Sibley app. Um, and that's because that app is like an investment into not just understanding birding, but understanding birds. Because there's just a different level of knowledge that you can appreciate when you can know the bird. Like I said, observing their behavior is part of that, not just looking at the bird, but seeing it, just going another level. And that's an app that can really, where you can really enjoy that. It was also an app that I used as an environmental educator that, we would have on like a big iPad, and because it was just easy to see, very, very illustrative, and the field marks were already pointed out, it made it just so much easier to connect that with, anybody. Um,
Cool.
and typically, and this is just for me, some of the difficulties I have, and the Audubon app uses pictures. So it's not like a deterrent, but, often pictures can be a little off, because that can be the perfect light to see that bird, but that may not be the light that you're seeing that bird. It may not always point out the field marks, like the specific identifying patterns or marks on the bird that will help you identify it. But the thing that I found most valuable is playing the sound from the app. And they also have sound waves, so you can visualize sound wave. Or I think they have that. Well, oh no, the Audubon app doesn't have sound waves, but I know that eBird does. The website ebird.org. But without apps, I think that the best, really, like, if you're looking for like a device to help you identify birds, using a notebook and a notepad, or a notebook and a notepad, this thingy, what's this, lapis, pen, um using one of these and just trying to sketch out what that bird looked like, is a really good way to practice seeing those details and keeping and retaining those details to memory, because those are the things that you start to put together to identify what that bird is. And then you'll realize that you can become quicker at it, because now you're like, okay, if I see this and this, it must be this bird. And then you start to understand from there what common birds you have in your regular, vicinity. And then when you get your common birds down, that's when really crazy things start to happen. Now it's migration, and then your regular birds that you've been seeing for the last 3 months over the summer, from it being a group of 12 birds, now it's a group of maybe 30 birds, because so many folks are coming in saying hi and passing through. That's why migratory birds are so important. It really not just changes the experience for the birder, but it's also like a huge, you know, global thing to be connected to that so many other animal species are doing in their own ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so it sounds like which is goofy, but like the best app might be just having a notebook and a pencil and kind of like I'm trying to figure out how to draw, just make notes. But the other ones you mentioned Audubon does have their own app, and there's
Mm-hmm.
also eBird. And if you really maybe like build up those birding skills and then go for that one that you
Oh
paid
wait, yeah, Audubon app.
Okay, yeah, that seems really cool. So yeah, the people that are like, "What's the app?" Really excited. Check out the Audubon app. It looks like just like that page I showed y'all. They have an app that will have all the information, and maybe just bring a notebook and figure out how to draw the birds you like.
Yeah, and also it's always so cool to start a field journal, which is basically what that is. Where yeah, you are writing down and describing what you're seeing, what you're observing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, what the weather was like, even the day it is, and then you start to realize that you can look at that and see that now you're starting to keep track of the migratory birds, because you're like, well, every fall on this day or around in this week, I see these many birds. And then, hopefully those amount of birds increase, or the diversity of those birds are sustained, and climate change doesn't win out, because the unfortunate reality that, Audubon projects on the climate visualizer, which is something that we just touched on, it shows how the migratory path of those birds will shift, or how the range for that bird to mate, or the range for that bird to migrate will shift, either further away from wherever you are, or will just shrink because their populations will dwindle.
Yeah, talking about migrating birds, someone earlier asked, like they had a specific thing for you. Have you ever been to Cape May, New Jersey in the fall to watch bird migration? They said it's really awesome.
No, I absolutely agree. I actually had to, I actually had the opportunity to hear from Richard Crosley, actually give a lecture from his garage about, some of the things that I touched on about understanding field marks and defining the topography of the bird, understanding like the top of the head versus the back of the head versus the nape versus the throat versus the neck. And it's just like understanding and, seeing the breakdown in the definitions of what you're seeing in the bird can really help you break down how to identify it, especially if it's a brand new bird.
Mhm.
When you see a bird for the first time, then you don't know how to identify. But if you just know how to look at a bird, you can just take from your memory or from your field journal what you saw, and just go to your and then you just go to your Sibley guide, and then you're just like, well, let's see, what did I see here? It was ooh, wow. What a page to turn on. Vermilion flycatcher. That's a great one.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I think
also the bird I have over there.
oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that I've seen people with the Sibley field guide. I don't know if your thoughts differ, but I like the Peterson field guides. They're
Hmm.
smaller.
Mm.
Field guides I think are really cool because again, like you mentioned, the pictures sometimes can be misleading, but I feel like it helps maybe just kickstart your brain to remember what it looks like.
Yeah.
Um,
And also like the different habitats that you can see it. Often these, the Sibley guide, as you see, it doesn't really have the bird in its habitat. It's just like the bird floating in white air. I mean, it might describe the different places that you could see it, but the advantage of seeing the bird in a picture is that you're often seeing it in its natural habitat, or seeing it like the black and white warbler. If you ever see a picture of a black and white warbler, it should be on a tree trunk, because that's very often where you would see the bird.
Gotcha. Yeah, and we do have a couple questions then about like how to be a birder for community science and maybe like some tips and tricks of learning birds and IDing for sounds. Someone mentioned that they do ornithology for Science Olympiad. So they want to get some tips from you.
Oh, wow. That sounds awesome. Well, first thing, great use of the word community science over citizen science, which maybe or had been popularized for very good reasons. But obviously, you're maybe not so obvious, but the term citizen almost makes it seem that, a national identity has to be claimed or required to participate in this. So community science, is a very welcome term. Thank you for using it and helping it, expand. Two of the things that come to mind when you say community science and birding, one is the Climate Watch project, which is something Audubon does, where there's a certain path that like we expect eastern bluebirds to fly on. And it's because bluebirds are especially sensitive to climate threats. So when we see things happen to them, when we see things happen to their populations or where they nest, we know that, adverse effects are, very describable. And that's, some of the science that we use to, then feed into that climate visualizer, but also what we talk to members of Congress about. But the Climate Watch project is basically a path where, it could be a path, it could be a trail, it could be, walking down a couple blocks, but you just try to count as many bluebirds as you see. And there's a website, I forgot the name of the website, but it's on audubon.org, Climate Watch. And then the second one, which is one that is over 100 or almost 100 years old. It's definitely over 100 years old. The Christmas bird count. And the Christmas bird count. Oh yeah, that one is it happens between not exactly on Christmas, but it happens, from mid December to early January, where it's kind of like a census of sorts, where you just go out, you have a certain territory, a certain given area, and then you just count every single bird you see in that area, every single bird. And that data, does go to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, the Mount Olympus of bird science, if you will, to be used in a lot of ways so that we understand, and that's a non-migratory bird season typically, or at least for songbirds, but it helps us understand the birds that are most often, nesting here, the birds that are here year round. And I know that there are some other efforts similar to the Christmas bird count. The Midwinter bird census in Philadelphia, administered by the Delaware Valley Ornithological Club. The Maryland, DC bird atlas, breeding bird atlas that's put together by the Maryland Ornithological Society, I believe. Somebody should quote me on that. It's those measures of doing bird counting, that really help the data of, the science interpretation and the crunching through the numbers that those folks do on that side. And that can be as easy as, again, signing up with those organizations or downloading the eBird app. The eBird app is, one of these little clever apps that I don't think is required for birding, but when you talk about doing community science, nothing really gets better than this. You start a checklist and you just start to, as you identify birds, put down what bird you saw, how many times, or not how many times you've seen the bird, but how many birds did you see? What was it doing? It has special codes, like if it's carrying nesting material, that means it's probably building a nest. If you see that same bird, but maybe that bird is like a juvenile or a first year, like that's interesting data too. And it asks you to, if you want to, or if you can, break all that down. Because again, that's the data that goes to, Cornell Lab of Ornithology that gives us that big understanding of what's happening to birds.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And yeah, so it sounds like we have a lot of like app resources, which is really great. But I guess for like memorizing is hard, but like learning different kinds of birds, like how to just kind of like look at a bird and know what it is. Like, did you have any like little tips, or did it just take time to figure that out?
It does take time, but the time that you should take, you should focus on bird shape, bird size or color, or I mean, and maybe the sound. Maybe the sound is second, because you can focus on the sound and sit in a park or just sit outside and just focus on bird sound and focus on how many different birds you hear, what directions you're hearing them from. When you're hearing them, are they flying? Are they perched? Are they saying it in response to another bird? These are things that you can really focus on and just sit down with. Not necessarily will that help you identify the bird if you're not referencing it to what that bird sound is, but it is a really good way to start to listen and engage with nature. But bird shape is often, or I see, is like the best way to identify a bird, because literally no bird has the same shape. Like there isn't a default shape for a warbler. There isn't a template. I mean, typically they are small, yes, and sometimes, and most of them are yellow, but that's not descriptive enough to let me know the difference between a Blackburnian warbler and a yellow warbler. Like that tells me, oops, okay, that's nothing. That tells me nothing. So bird shape is really, really key. Bird shape also goes into how it looks when it's perched, as well as how it looks when it's flying. A turkey vulture, for example, you see it has big big wingspans, and the arms are always up like a V. That's how I see it. That shape is very easy for me to see, and so I'm like, oh, okay, that's a turkey vulture. And similar to other soaring birds, you got the red-tailed hawk, that you know its tail is a lot more fanned out because it's getting more air so that it doesn't have to work as hard to flap. um, it's those small accumulation of details that when you start with shape, you can really start to break down the details of what that bird could be, especially when you don't know what the bird is. There's also interesting things in seeing the shape, that sometimes you'll see a crest on some birds and sometimes you won't. The ruby crown kinglet, for example, you won't see the ruby crown unless the bird gets really excited. And obviously the ruby crown is very bright and, easy to see, but it also changes the shape of the bird a little bit because now it has a bit of a crest. So bird shape is a really important thing to look at when you're starting to think about the birds that you're seeing. And again, focus on the common birds. That could be the first 6 or 7 birds that you see and interact with every day. And keep that list and really think about how their behavior changes through the year.
Gotcha. Cool. That sounds hopefully super helpful for our person that was asking about learning how to ID the birds in their area.
Yeah. Start with shape.
Yeah, and I do have a question that we're gonna put this to the test. The start with a shape and ID this bird.
All
Someone
right.
asked, what type of bird do you think Woodstock is from the Snoopy comics? And if not a specific bird, what kind of bird do you think that he was modeled after? If you're
It's a
familiar.
really great question. I would say my first thought is warbler, because it's a little yellow bird, and obviously not all warblers are little yellow birds, and um, his head shape is is a lot bigger than its body. So that's the part that makes it a little harder to say which type of warbler.
Mhm.
Uh, but because it's all yellow, I'm gonna give it the yellow warbler if I were to guess.
See, that was fast. Just the fact that the color, the shape. I don't know
Mhm.
what kind of sound Woodstock makes, but
Yeah, I was gonna say that would be helpful too. Maybe that could break it down into which kind. But yeah, I would say some type of small yellow warbler.
awesome, cool. Um, and yeah, thank you for. I think it was Grant that had that question.
Thank you so much.
So we do have a couple questions about specific birds. Have you
Mm.
ever seen a peregrine falcon? And then, what is the rarest North American bird? Do you know? And have you seen it?
Okay, I love that second question, because that second question is a matter of debate. But I will tell you the rarest bird I've seen. But first, the peregrine falcon.
Mhm.
Yes, I've seen a peregrine falcon in flight. not in like the 300 mile per hour flight, but in regular bird flight. um, I also know that in the city of Philadelphia, there's a peregrine falcon that's actually nesting in the city hall building. And, it is or it was some type of special ceremony. A friend of mine, Tony, the one actually who was the education manager for my first job and now my best friend, he had the opportunity to actually clean the nest with the mayor. And, they wore hard hats and they had brooms to help get some of the junk out of there. It was like a cool moment, for peregrine falcons. But I will say, peregrine falcons are the fastest moving gravity assisted thing on the planet. But hummingbirds are faster than peregrine falcons relative to size. Relative to size and shape, hummingbirds travel faster than peregrine falcons. And also keep in mind, peregrine falcons use gravity to help them out. I will say, to add to that, now that I think about it, the mallard duck, that is the fastest horizontally flying duck of all of them. So if everyone was just flying at a normal speed, the duck's normal speed is faster than everybody else's normal speed.
Interesting.
Some fast bird facts.
That's why you don't mess with mallards.
Yeah. Also, that's why you don't mess with ducks. It's just there are battles you can win, and then there's battles you can choose, and hopefully you choose not to go into that one. So the rarest bird in North America, I would say it would have to be something that and the idea of rare, meaning has it been observed just once? There's plenty of birds that have been observed just once. And some of those reasons could be because of storms. So, the recent hurricane we had, as destructive as it was, and, as much tragic, much of a tragedy as it was to so many families, there are birders who look at those storms and see that that's an opportunity to get a rare bird, because that will take a bird off its regular track by a lot sometimes. And the fate of that bird often is tragic as well, because there's a reason that it migrates a certain way, and throwing it off that migratory route, it's probably not going to find the resources it needs or the right shelter it needs. So that's a bird that you can see reported in places, but that might have coincided with a large storm, and not always a hurricane, but just a large storm sometimes can blow a bird off its track. So that could be rare in that sense. But then there's also rare in the continental sense, where there are birds that typically migrate from India to Russia that might end up in the United States somehow, and it's just like, how? No clue. Maybe it got on a shipping container and then nested and was okay for 2 months, or however long it gets. I don't know. With all that being said, the rarest bird I've seen, I feel terrible because I feel like I don't remember where I saw it or the name of it, but it was some type of waterfowl that everybody was going nuts about. And I was much younger in my birding journey, and this is why I regret not keeping a field journal, because it was just such a moment for me to understand that this bird, only comes here once a year, and this is the type of rare bird that I think about when you say rare bird. It comes here once a year, and it's usually 1 or 2 sightings that people get of this bird within this very small time frame. But that bird comes here for the habitat, and that lets me know how important that habitat is to this migratory bird, because this bird is literally just stopping in at their favorite Waffle House to come in and order their favorite drink and then leave. If we have a chance to say hi to it, that's something special.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that description of it's on its little road trip, it's stopping, and then it's gone again.
Yeah, and it's the favorite Waffle House, so of course it's gonna stop by.
What did it look like? Do you have any kind of memory? People are asking
Oh man, I remember I was cold, and I was like, "We're not gonna see this bird." I
Or where were you again?
Oh, this was in Philadelphia at John Hines Wildlife National Refuge, or in Cape May in the Pine Barrens. the type of habitat was like marshy, but it was like cold outside. So I have no idea what we were looking for.
That's
It
okay.
was, I mean, it's part traumatic experience of me being really cold outside, but then also part of like being a birder, where it's just like I was probably up at 6 a.m. that morning. And
Yeah.
as miserable as I'm kind of sounding, that those are the type of experiences that really connect me to nature and really remind me, not just how lucky I am that I get to experience it in this way, but it also reminds me that I want other people to in their own way. And being an advocate for birds, I'm also an advocate for people enjoying birds. And that takes a lot of forms, and most recently that was organizing Black Birders Week with, some of the Black scientists that you may have seen recently on this show, as well as on Twitter.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then someone's asking about, have you been to Australia before? They said there's a lot of really cool birds there.
I hadn't had the opportunity to travel to Australia, but it is something that I am looking forward to. I mean, I know that the fires have, decimated wildlife in a lot of ways, but there are so many efforts and so many, good efforts that are going into restoring that and seeing that wildlife conservation, is a priority when we're thinking about how Australia recovers, because a lot of those places were affecting very effective in hurting wildlife. I would travel, or I almost did travel to the mountainous regions of Portugal and Spain, to do like a travel birding trip with David Lindo, I believe. And it just didn't, I didn't have a passport. It didn't happen. And I just like, ugh. But it's definitely traveling around the world to look at birds is definitely a bigger life goal for me, because that's a really neat way to feel connected to this bigger thing, and I think obviously there's a lot of ways to do it, but to go and travel to see, I mean, especially going to South America, that's where the birds are for most of the year anyway. To go there, that would be quite a treat.
Yeah, that's where I had a friend that is there. They like did their, I don't remember what they did their PhD in specifically, but they're like,
Mhm.
I think they would categorize themselves as an ornithologist, and they were very, very excited about the birds in Peru and kind of got me on board because they were so excited, which
Nice.
is really cool. Like I got to hold a hummingbird. Yeah, we
Oh wow.
caught them in. So a lot of times when people are doing like sampling and stuff, they'll just for everyone to have a better picture, they'll set up these nets so that they can catch the birds safely and then ID them and then release them again. And I got to hold the hummingbird, but what I learned is hummingbirds get really scared. So when you're holding it, it will kind of play dead. And so when I opened my hand, it just laid there for a second, and I was very nervous that I had hurt it. But it flew away. I tilted my hand, and then it immediately flew away. So I had like a short
Wow.
second of, oh no. But yeah, I agree that, well, like it sounds like traveling to see birds, of course, is like really cool. There's amazing birds in your backyard that you might not even, we have a scrub jay in my backyard that will visit to pick up the lunch scraps every once in a while. So
Nice.
yeah. And we got a question a bit ago that I was kind of waiting to see if the conversation led there, but I don't know anything about birds in space. Have they ever taken birds into space before?
Hmm.
I don't know. I imagine it'd have to be a small bird.
I think the closest reference I have to a bird or at least something with wings and an astronomical body that isn't terrestrial, is the story of Icarus flying into the sun.
Oh, yeah.
Outside of that, I think it would be interesting to know what bird hits the highest elevation, and then to be like, is that the bird that is closest to space?
True.
Um,
Or even if like, so people have taken animals up in spaceships, but I'm like, I don't know if we'd need I'm like trying to imagine, like, I guess you could just see how anti-gravity affects birds specifically.
So yeah, I would say if the question is how would a bird interact in a weightless environment, I think the bird. Well, I think it'd be interesting to see how the bird navigates itself because birds like to do that thing like a gyroscope with their head. Um, I think that would be interesting to see. But also one thing to look out for is like feathers going everywhere because like normally when we're on Earth and gravity is pulling in one direction, those feathers know exactly where that is and they can hold on more easily. But I feel like if you put a bird in a weightless environment, it's just going to start flapping everywhere. And then like those little particles from the wings are just going to start flying all these different places. Then, they has to move slow and then you got to get it. And then, I just feel like it's a mess. That's what I'm saying. It's going to be a mess. Don't put a bird in space. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Someone just mentioned that maybe a hummingbird has been to space. I might need to
Oh,
do some
wow.
research on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do love
Hummingbirds and
hummingbirds. Yeah, the fact that I got to hold one, that was like a little, like, now I have this connection with hummingbirds I see, even if they're not even the same species. But that's really cool. I have no idea. I'd love to hear. I'm gonna have to do some research, and maybe some people can interact with our Twitter or Instagram or Facebook and let us know. Birds in space. Have they been there?
yeah. Yeah. Have they been there?
um, So I have a couple more questions, and then Skype a Scientist, we always have like a couple questions at the end for you, but I
Mhm.
want to make sure I can get everyone's questions answered first. I think this person's located in Massachusetts. They asked, so since you're from the East Coast area, I don't know if you've been to Massachusetts, but do you know kind of the strangest bird you've seen in Massachusetts?
I actually have a friend who lives in Boston, and we had the opportunity to do a little bit of birding in and around the Kennedy Museum. You know where that is. They're from, or if they're from Massachusetts and not from
I
Boston.
don't know if I'm like nodding as I'm thinking. I personally don't. I lived in Pennsylvania, but that's the only East Coast, upper
hmm
East Coast I've lived in.
The craziest bird then that I saw wasn't really crazy and wasn't really seen. It was tasted. It was my first time I had Pekin duck,
Mm,
and that was a great experience. So for Massachusetts, there's that.
eat some birds there instead.
Mhm.
And a quick back to the space. We had someone say in the 70s, I guess Russia took quail eggs to space. And maybe Americans have taken chicken embryos. So maybe no flapping birds, but
Not yet.
yeah, because I can
Um,
imagine they wouldn't. Yeah, I don't know if they would enjoy no gravity.
yeah, yeah. I mean, but I guess it's worth making the reference. I guess if not a weightless environment, perhaps we can put birds on the moon.
That would be cool. They just
Birds on the moon,
they
2020.
can fly a lot. Maybe they can fly a lot higher. They're kind of just balancing for a second, and then this
Exactly.
kind of
Birds on the moon.
what are those? There's that specific bird species that moves between the ox, maybe. They like kind of the waves, and they kind of balance. They use the air
Yeah,
current.
yeah, yeah. I think yeah, that's a tough seabird. Yeah. Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah, I'm imagining that, but they're just hovering. Birds on the moon.
hmm
That's
Birds on the moon.
um, that's awesome. All right, and it looks like our questions are wrapping up. Um, I do. So we were having some questions about basically like scientists being able to come and speak in classrooms. And I believe if you visit our different social media outlets, I think our poll for signing up for classrooms for scientists to come speak is on Saturday. So keep an eye out for that, and I will like repost and share all of that. Because it sounds like some people are maybe more interested in learning about birds in the future. I don't know if you're on our database
I don't
for,
know if I am either.
you should
What
get
do I got
on
to
there.
do? Yeah,
It's pretty
yeah.
cool. And so if anyone that's unfamiliar, besides just the live streams, we also do Skype a Scientist lets scientists come into classrooms and kind of give these, it's almost like a closer interaction with what we're doing now. So you can ask questions and like learn more about different people in science. And it's a really cool opportunity. So for the person that asked about that, we'll get that poll up soon, and definitely sign up and put in that you're interested in finding someone interested in birding, and we'll try to connect you with someone. So, and then now I've got some questions for you from that everyone gets asked. So our first question is pretty simple. Is there anything that you wish that you would have been asked today?
So, am I a scientist? I don't think so. It's a definition that I like to use liberally, but I do use, in a lot of political context. So I do have a bias towards the connotation of what it means. And so in that bias, I may not personally feel that I identify as a scientist in that same way. But scientist is not the white lab coat, situation. It's not always in the lab. It's not always publishing a paper or having doctor or master's somewhere in your name. Science is a process. It's part of the journey of engaging with knowledge. And I hope that everyone feels inspired to take that journey and just see where it takes them. And, if it does take you to a lab, if it does take you to, working in the field, looking for a nest, if that's where it takes you, so be it. But also if it takes you to Capitol Hill where you're, seeing what the science outcomes are to advocate for legislation, then, I think that that's a nice place to see it as well. I'm also biased towards that because that's kind of where I'm
I
at.
think that that's important. For all the points you just made is that we do need scientists involved in policy and government, because we kind of want to have that, like, science is important everywhere. So, and yeah, scientists are not just in the lab coat, like a white guy with the mustache. That's like always the Einstein picture. I don't even know if I had a mustache, but
no, I like the mustache. I was like, yeah, mustache.
That's kind of the whole purpose of this and Skype a Scientist and having scientists visit the classrooms is like, yeah, there's scientists we all are different, and scientists have different interests outside of science, and we're all interested in different kinds of science. And I think what's being pushed now is to be a scientist, it's like you're curious about science and you're pursuing some career involved in that. And it's not just the professor. There's scientists in lots of different ways.
And the other question is, so I did go to college. I almost never talk about it because I honestly forget sometimes, but I did go to college to study mathematics, computer science, and teaching. I was convinced that I was going to be a math teacher, the assistant, coach on the robotics team to help George Washington Carver High School get back to the Nationals. I was so specifically on that dream. And I really do, to this day, love math and computer science. I'm just not good at it. And when you're not good at it in college, that reflects poorly on your GPA and then, yada, yada, yada. But I always had an interest in politics, and, serving my community with environmental education was one of those first things that made me realize not just public service is important to me, but being connected to my neighbors and doing that through birding was one of those ways. And now I work at an organization where I can literally get paid to bird and get people to care about bird watching. So
yeah, that's awesome. So we're gonna go a little bit over because I have 2 questions left, but they're pretty short. Is there something that you wish everyone knew about maybe birding?
You can get started any day of the week, any minute of the hour, any time of year, and you have something to learn. Whether you've been birding, from 20 years ago, 20 minutes ago, you got something to learn, you got something to enjoy, and it's definitely something worth being present for. And so I just hope that everybody can find a way to enjoy that.
That's awesome. And then the last question, very open, is there something that you wish everyone knew about anything? So it's kind of like, I always picture this as like the fun fact that you want to share with if you could share with everyone, what would you share?
I'm going to answer that question 2 ways. The first way is, what is something I wish everyone knew that we currently don't know? And that is how octopus work. Like, how do they do camouflage? How do their, like, I want to know. I think if everyone knew that, we would just be in a better place. I don't know why. That's just a belief. If I had that answer, I would have totally shared that as a fun fact, but I don't. But I wish everyone knew that. But if there is a fun fact I want to leave everyone with, it is something that I've talked about. I actually did a little YouTube video on it. The European starling. European starling, the eye roll or bane to some birders. I realize I have, or at least my ancestors have, something very much in common with the European starling, and that is the fact that we were both brought over on ships against our will, and we're both here today. And it's like, huh, that's a fun fact. I don't know how to develop that more, but I just realized that was just something we had in common,
Yeah. No,
or
that's
at least our ancestors.
that's like the beauty of the fun fact. It can anything. Share anything you think is cool to kind of end off our meeting with. So that's interesting.
Yeah, something to think about. Food for thought. Plenty to eat.
So yeah, it looks like thank you everyone we went a little over, so it seems, it's 11, so I don't want to keep us too long. Thank you everyone for being able to come. Thank you, Aaron, for doing all of the translating for us today. And
thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about birds. I feel like I learned so much about. I feel like now I can go out and like better ID more than just a scrub jay on my grill.
Hey, that's a great start though. So I hope you get out and bird more, and contact Bird Twitter if you have any birding questions.
Yeah, that's true. Anyone, there is a huge community of people very passionate about birding. If you ever have questions, I feel like comment on our social media pages, and I bet you birders that follow Skype a Scientist will help you out. Just
make sure you put when and where everything is happening, because that's always like the thing. People will post a picture of the bird and be like, what is this? And it might be obvious what it is, but like I don't want to say unless I know where and when it was taken.
Sure. Yeah, provide some location. Yeah, that's awesome. And try to make the picture as least blurry as possible.
Yeah. Try to tell the bird to hold still.
Yeah, please stop moving. Well, awesome. And I'll leave us at that. Thank you so much for coming on again. And
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.
You too.
Well, cool.
All right, see you, everybody.
See ya.